In the last lecture, I introduced you through the Nyāya epistemology. In this one, I will talk about pratyaksha or perception. So, sage Gautama, the founder of the Nyāya school, accepts 4 pramanas or valid sources of knowledge when he says, Pratyakshanumanoupamana shabdaha pramanani, meaning perception, inference, comparison and word or verbal testimony, these are the means of right knowledge. Now let us discuss pratyaksha or perception. Gautama in his Nyāya Sutra says, Indriyartha sannikarsho utpannam jnanam avyapadeshyam avyabhichari vyavasayatmakam pratyaksham, meaning perception is that knowledge which arises from the contact of a sense with its object and which is inexpressible, does not wander and is well defined. Let us understand each component of this definition. The first is Indriyartha sannikarshoutpannam jnanam, which means perception happens by the stimulation of the sense organs that is brought about by their contact with their respective objects. Now, this definition is very much in tune with our common sense and is accepted by many schools. The Vaisheshika system says that perception is knowledge which is conditioned by the sense organs. The Sankhya as well as the Yoga system on similar lines emphasize the role of sense organs in perception. The Sankhya school says direct perception is the ascertainment of objects by their respective senses. The Yoga Sutra also says that perception is the mental modification produced by sense impressions and is mainly related to the specific characters entering into the nature of the individual object of perception. The Bhattamimamsakas also understand perception as the cognition which is produced by the efficient contact of the sense organs with their objects. Although these schools have emphasized the role of sense-object contact in their definitions of perception, but Nyāya being Nyāya has attacked their definitions. For example, Jayanta Bhatta in his Nyāya Manjari says that the Sankhya definition of perception as prativishayad avasayo drishtam overextends to inference. Against the Mimamsa, Udyotkara in his Nyāya Vartika says that their definition of perception does not exclude doubt. Interestingly, Gangesha, who is the founder of the Navya Nyāya tradition, finds faults with the old Nyāya definition itself. He gives 2 arguments. One is that the definition of perception as Indriyartha sannikarshoutpannam jnanam is too wide as it applies to both inference and memory, because in these cases also there is sense-object contact. The mind, which is the internal sense, it is operated and related to the object that is known through memory or inference. His other argument is that this definition is too narrow as it precludes the omniscience of God. God has direct perception of all truths and reality. If sense-object contact is a necessary condition for perception, then there is no scope for divine perceptions. So, on these grounds, Gangesha and the other Navya Nyāya philosophers reject the definition of perception put forward by the old school of Nyāya. It's not that the old Naiyayikas did not foresee such a criticism. They knew that perception is not caused by sense-object contact only, and that there are other causes of perception as well, like Atma Manah Samyoga, or even divine perception. And it is also true that the sutra in which perception is defined fails to spell out the other causes of perception. But the old Nyayikas had their defense ready. So, in defense, the old Nyaya philosophers say that sense-object contact is the asadharan karana or uncommon cause of perception. The so-called Atma Manah Samyoga, that is contact between the self and the mana, is a common cause because it is present in all types of cognition, whether it is perceptual or inferential or based on comparison or verbal. Hence, by virtue of a sadharan karana, which is the common cause, perception remains indistinguishable from other types of cognition. This is why in the definition of perception, an asadharan karana has been mentioned and there is nothing wrong in it. And therefore, perception can be defined truly with reference to its asadharan karana or uncommon cause. However, the Navya Nyaya school has given a definition of perception which according to them takes care of these two faults in the old definition. So, their definition of perception is pratyakshasya sakshatkaritvam lakshanam, meaning perception is knowledge which has the characteristic of immediacy. So, whether it is the visual perception or the auditory or tactual or the one related to taste or to smell, all these perceptions are associated with the feeling that something is immediately known by the perceiver. Another interesting definition that we come across in the Navya Nyaya tradition is that Jnana karnakam jnanam iti tu vayam, meaning perception is a cognition that does not have a cognition as its chief instrumental cause. Now, this definition is applicable to all cases of perception, whether human or divine. And this definition also excludes the other pramanas, so that problem of the definition being too wide or too narrow is sorted. Let us see how. Now, inference requires the previous knowledge of the universal relation between two things, which is called the Vyapti Jnana. Comparison requires as its effective cause the knowledge of similarity between two things or the Sadrishya Jnana. In verbal testimony, knowledge is produced by the understanding of the meanings of words or Padajnana. Even memory relies for its origin on some direct experience in the past, which is called Purva Anubhava. It is only in case of perception that our knowledge is not dependent on any past experience. There is an interesting thing that I want to tell you at this point. Those Nyaya philosophers who were neutral, they tried to reconcile the old Nyaya definition of perception with the Navya Nyaya definition. So, philosophers like Udayana suggested that sage Gautama's definition in terms of Indriyartha Sannikarshotpannam Jnanam applies only to the ordinary perceptions of humans and makes no suggestions with regard to the eternal, unconditional knowledge of the divine being. However, when we talk about the perception in a broader sense, so as to include both ordinary as well as extraordinary perceptions of the humans and eternal perceptions of the divine being, then we should define perception as sakshatkaritvam or immediate knowledge and as jnana karnakam or knowledge which is not brought about by another knowledge. So, this was Udayana's way to close the gap between the old and the new school of Nyāya with regard to the definition of perception. Now, there is another Nyāya philosopher, Keshava Mishra. He, in his own way, tried to bridge this gap between the two Nyāya schools. So, he in his work Tarka Bhasha says that the two definitions of perception actually are not saying different things. He says, Sakshatkari Pramakaranam Pratyaksham Sakshatkarini cha Prama Saivochyatendriyaja, meaning perception is the source of valid immediate knowledge, and immediate knowledge is that which is brought about by sense-object contact. So, according to him, for knowledge there is no distinction between what is immediate and what is sensed. Anyway, generally it is maintained that the definition suggested by the Navya Nyaya school is logical and therefore more acceptable. There is no denial that there are instances of knowledge which are perceptual and yet are not due to sense-object contact. You also think about it. How about the intuition of a Siddha yogi? Also, what Gangesha talks about, the omniscience of God. Not to forget the abnormal perceptions like illusions, hallucinations, dreams, or confusion due to intoxication. Now, what am I talking about? Illusions, hallucinations, dreams, confusion? I guess it is time to discuss the other characteristics of perception. So, let's go back to the definition of perception. And it is Indriyartha Sannikarshotpannam Jnanam Avyapadeshyam Avyabhichari Vyavasayatmakam Pratyaksham. I have already discussed the first part of the definition. Let's now understand the terms Avyapadeshyam, Avyabhichari and Vyavasayatmakam. Now, about these characteristics, sage Gautama has not said much. So, we depend on the various commentaries written on the Nyaya Sutras. Now, the definition says that perception is avyapadeshya, which means it is not dependent on language or verbal descriptions to be valid. According to the Naiyayikas, words play a role only when the cognition of the object is conveyed, it is reported, not when the object is perceived. And avyapadeshya prevents application of the definition of perceptual cognition to cognitions which have words as their contents, so that the definition does not overextend, so that unintended things are not included in the definition. You know, the debate and discussion that happens within the Nyaya school is very interesting. As I said, sage Gautama did not elaborate on these characteristics of perception. He just stated the definition. Now, why these characteristics were included, that has been discussed in the various commentaries. Now, for example, Vatsyayana and Udyotkara claimed that the word avyapadeshyam was included in Gautama's definition to prevent its application to verbal knowledge, that is, to knowledge which has word as its content. Now, this implies that for both Vatsyayana and Udyotkara, the knowledge which arises due to Indriyartha Sannikarsha and Shabda is not to be considered as perceptual knowledge. It is in fact verbal knowledge, because here the pramana is Shabda. Same thing was discussed by Sridhara and Udayana when they explained Prashastapada's definition of perception, and in that context they commented on the term avyapadeshyam. Both of them maintained that if a person who is unaware of the relation between the word cow and the object that it refers to has sense contact with a cow, and if at the same time a reliable person tells him this is a cow, then the knowledge of the person cannot be perceptual, it is verbal. Of course, this knowledge has arisen due to Indriyartha Sannikarsha and Shabda, but it is the heard Shabda which played the most significant role in generating this knowledge. So, for these philosophers, perceptual cognition should be only due to Indriyartha Sannikarsha and not due to Shabda. The words avyabhichari and vyavasayatmakam are used in the definition of perception to exclude illusion and doubt from perceptual knowledge. In summer, the sun's rays coming in contact with earthly heat appear to the eyes of men as water. So, what is presented in the mirage are the rays of the sun which hide their specific character and take the form of water. The characteristics of water which is present elsewhere are presented here. The knowledge of water derived in this way is not perception, and this is the Nyāya theory of illusion, technically called Anyatha Khyati. To eliminate such cases of illusion, the term avyabhichari is used, which in English means non-wandering, non-erratic. Now let's understand the fourth term in the definition of perception, vyavasayatmakam. The term vyavasayatmakam distinguishes perception from indeterminate knowledge. As, for instance, a man looking from a distance cannot ascertain whether there is smoke or dust. So, correct perception which excludes doubt either because of one's failure to observe all the details or because one is mixing inference with observation and observing what one wants to observe, or not observing what one does not want to observe, is taken care of by this characteristic of pratyaksha. So, these are the four requirements for a valid perceptual knowledge to take place. However, at this point, I want to explain a very important topic that concerns the first part of the definition, Indriyartha Sannikarsha Utpannam Jnanam. What we have understood so far is that with the contact of the sense organ and the object, the sense organ establishes a relation with its appropriate object, which ultimately results in the perception of the object. According to Nyāya, Indriyartha Sannikarsha or sense-object contact is of 6 kinds. I must tell you that the Nyāya philosophers are metaphysical realists, which is why they accepted the Vaisheshika categories. So, for them, whether it is the category of Samanya, which is universal, or Abhava, which is negation, or Samavaya, which is inherence, or any other, they are all reals and are perceived by the sense organs through one of these 6 kinds of contacts. Now, the first kind of contact is called samyoga or conjunction. This is the direct contact or conjunction of the sense organ with its object. For example, when there is a direct contact of the eye with an apple, the eye finds its way to the apple and gets conjoined with it, so that we have a visual perception of an apple. Now, the second is samyukta samavaya or inherence in what is conjoined. This is an indirect contact of the sense organ with its object through the mediation of a third term that is related to both. So we know that qualities, actions and universals inhere in substance, and these are perceived along with the substance. For example, an apple is conjoined with the eyes, but the apple also contains the color as an inherent quality of it. So when we see the color of the apple, our eyes come in contact with the color through the medium of the apple. So this is inherence in what is conjoined, samyukta samavaya. Now the third, it is samyukta samaveta samavaya or inherence in what is inseparably related to what is conjoined. This is an even more indirect contact with the mediation of two terms that are related. Now, the universals inhere in qualities and actions, and these are perceived through this kind of contact. So, when our eyes come in contact with the universal redness, inhering in the red color of the apple, there is contact of the eyes with the object, redness, through the medium of two terms, apple and red. This is called samyukta samaveta samavaya because it is due to the object's samavaya or inherence in something which is samaveta or inseparably related to what is samyukta or conjoined to the sense organ. Now the fourth, it is samavaya or inherence. This also is an indirect sense-object contact. Here, the sense organ is in contact with its object insofar as the object inheres as a quality in the sense itself. For example, in the auditory perception of sound, when we hear a sound, the sound inheres in the ear. So, the sense organ of hearing is in contact with the sound in the relation of samavaya. And the fifth contact is samaveta samavaya or the relation of inherence in that which inheres in the sense. Here, the sense is in contact with its object through a third term that is inseparably related to both. For example, in the auditory perception of soundness, the ear is in contact with the object soundness because it inheres in the sound, which in turn inheres as a quality in the ear. Now, the last, which is the sixth, it is visheshanata. Here, the sense is in contact with its object insofar as the object is a qualification of the other term connected with the sense. It is with this type of contact that the Nyāyikas explain the perception of non-existence. For example, take the visual perception of the non-existence of a cat in this room. When I see the non-existence of a cat in this room, my visual sense organ is in contact with non-existence as a qualification or visheshana of this room, which is samyukta or in conjunction with the eye. Let's take another example. The perception of the non-existence of sound in the odor of earth. Here, our sense is in contact with the non-existence as a qualification of odor, which inheres in the earth as conjoined to the sense. Now, these 6 types of contacts are called laukika or ordinary. And these are normal contacts between the senses and their objects. there are 3 alaukika or extraordinary contacts in the Nyāya system. In the alaukika perceptions, the objects are not actually present to the sense, but they are conveyed to it through an extraordinary medium. Actually, we do not find such a classification in the old Nyāya school. This distinction appears in the Navya Nyāya tradition. Anyway, the 3 alaukika or extraordinary contacts are: number 1, samanya lakshana, or the perception of the whole class of objects through the generic property perceived in an individual member of that class. For example, when upon seeing the catness in a cat, we also, through that perceived catness, perceive all other cats in whom the catness inheres. So here the individual is perceived in the ordinary way, but the class is perceived in the extraordinary way. Now the second is jnana lakshana, or the perception of an object which is in contact with the sense through a previous knowledge of itself. For example, upon perceiving a cup of steaming coffee from a distance, I have an immediate perception of its nutty taste. Here, my past knowledge of the nutty taste of coffee brings about the present perception of it, although I am not actually tasting it. So this is perception by association or perception through an associated concept. The third is yogaja, or the intuitive perception of all objects, past, distant and future, due to some supernormal powers generated in the mind through yogic practices. Vishwanath in his Karikavali divides yogaja under 2 categories, perfect and imperfect. So, one who has mastered oneself in yogic meditation can know everything and at all times. This is the perfect kind. On the other hand, in the imperfect kind, one has to make a special effort for concentrating one's mind, for knowing particular objects at particular times. Actually, yogaja does not belong to the ordinary people, but the other 2 kinds of extraordinary perceptions do. So this much in this lecture. Thank you so much.